Good morning. It is the 28th of September, 2023. Doing the New York Times Daily Propaganda Brag. Today's columnists are David Leonhardt and Ian Prasad Philbrick. We're covering the looming government shutdown as well as the Republican cringe last night, the auto workers strike, and banjos in Arkansas. That ought to be fun. 3 days left. Two basic facts are central to the understanding why the federal government may shut down on Sunday morning. First, the House Republican caucus contains about 20 hard right members who sometimes support radical measures to get what they want. Radical measures, that's framing. Many of them refuse to certify the 2020 presidential election, for example, that has nothing to do with this, and now favor impeaching President Biden because he's accused credibly of a lot of crimes. They also tend to support deep cuts to federal spending. Biggest spending ever, and they're willing to shut down the government as a negotiating tactic. No, that's the Democrats doing that. This is a framing thing. It's the Democrats who refuse to budge. The Republicans are like, "Hey, we can't keep spending into infinity." Democrats are like, "No, give us everything or we'll shut the government down." And then the Democrats blame the Republicans like this. It's just all about the Democrats because the Republicans can come together and come with a deal. It's the Democrats won't do it. Let's see. Quote, "This is a whole new concept of individuals that just want to burn the whole place down," Speaker Kevin McCarthy, a fellow Republican, said last week. McCarthy is a Democrat. He has a Republican by his name, but he's part of the Uniparty. Second, the Republicans' House majority is so slim that McCarthy needs the support of most of these roughly 20 members to remain Speaker. If he passes a bill to fund the government and keep it open without support from the hard right faction, he can retaliate by calling for a new vote on his speakership and potentially firing him. Nobody knows who would then become Speaker. This combination has created a strange situation in Washington. Most House members, along with President Biden, want to avoid a shutdown. So does the Senate. A bipartisan group agreed last week on a spending bill that would keep the government open through mid-November. A similar bill could probably pass the House by a wide margin if it came to the floor. Yet the small Republican faction has enough sway over McCarthy that he has resisted allowing a vote on such a bill. As a result, much of the federal government may shut down this weekend. The deadline is midnight on Saturday night. We know that some readers find this potential shutdown to be both complex and a frustrating story, but it's now a serious enough possibility to deserve some attention. Let's see. Feeling sold out. This conflict has its roots in the debt limit increase that Congress passed and Biden signed in June. Most countries don't have a debt limit. They debate taxes and spending when voting on whether or not to fund government programs. The U.S. government has a two-stage process in which Congress decides first how to spend money and later how to pay back the debts it has already accumulated. The more extreme parts of the Republican House membership, just before I continue here, the reason why we have that is because we spend more money than we have. If we didn't spend more money than we have, we wouldn't have to worry about the debt ceiling fight. The reason why we have to have a debt ceiling fight is because we continue to spend more money than we have, which pushes the debt ever higher. So it's not that we have to do this, it's that the Democrats and many Republicans want to keep spending money to infinity. More extreme parts of the Republican House membership, quote, the Wrecking Ball Caucus, as Carl Hugels, the Times chief Washington correspondent, has called it, seemed as if they might use the debt ceiling debate to insist on large spending cuts. They know that if the U.S. breached its debt limit, a financial crisis could follow. Ultimately, though, the Republican faction allowed McCarthy to negotiate a fairly normal deal. It cut some forms of spending, like tax enforcement, but only modestly. The deal also included agreements about spending levels over the next 2 years, meant to avoid future government shutdowns. For Biden and most American citizens, the deal's main benefit was obvious: no economic crisis. For Republicans, the deal also offered the advantage of making McCarthy look like an effective leader who could negotiate on its behalf. But the right-wing faction came to hate the deal once others began celebrating it. Quote, a lot of hard-right Republicans held their nose and voted for the debt limit increase the first time to give McCarthy negotiating leverage, Carl writes, and then felt like they were sold out even though everyone in Washington saw what was coming. The faction has since decided that it does not need to abide by the earlier spending agreements and wants to renegotiate them by threatening to shut the government down. Both White House officials and some Senate Republicans are frustrated by the turnabout. We settled this 5 months ago with a bipartisan budget agreement, which, by the way, 2/3 of Republicans in the House voted for. Jeff Zients, the White House chief of staff, told us last night. If the government shuts down, Zients said, 1 million active duty troops and their families could have to worry about how they pay their bills. That's a lie. People could have to worry about fewer food inspections on the job. That's a lie. Cancer research would stall. Also, mostly a lie. To a certain extent, that might be true, but not really. So all right. Active duty troops always get their paychecks. They're essential. They're fine. The fewer food inspections, that's an outright lie. The federal government does not perform food inspections at states. State health departments do this. The federal government does not have a federal health department. It has the FDA, but that has nothing to do with health inspections or anything along those lines. Some cancer research could theoretically stall, but not in a significant way. That's just a fear thing. And again, what is it going to stall? It's not going to stall anything significant. All right. When it comes to cancer research, this is done at universities that are state funded anyway. So all that's going to happen is like they might have a test where they're going to have to wait a week to get the results. Nothing is going to change as a result of that. One obstacle to a solution is that different parts of the Republican group have different demands, such as Katie Edmondson, a Times reporter on Capitol Hill, said. Some want to increase spending on border security while cutting other programs. Others acknowledge that they want to weaponize the threat of a shutdown to force major spending cuts. Most of what we do as Congress is totally unjustified, Bob Good, a Republican representative of Virginia, recently told Carl. What's next? The outcome remains uncertain. The Republican faction might ultimately accept small symbolic spending cuts and claim victory, or the government might shut down this weekend. The situation is a reminder that partisan polarization in Washington is not symmetrical. Yes, Democrats have moved significantly to the left. Yeah, not significantly, hard left on some major issues in recent decades, while Republicans have moved significantly to the right. Not really. Moving to the right means you want less government. The Republicans create a large government too. But a large number of only one party's members, Republicans, is willing to take procedural steps that both parties would have once considered too extreme. It's true about election certification. You mean when the 2016, when the Democrats objected to Trump and they objected to Bush both times? So that's a lie. The debt ceiling and a government shutdown. Matt Dallek, a historian at George Washington University, described the rise of this faction as, quote, the fairly logical culmination of an increasingly radical and increasingly extremist Republican Party. Yeah, that's hilarious considering the Democrats now demand you agree that women can have a penis, that men can give birth, that the gas that plants breathe is a pollutant, that life begins whenever they say it is, and you can abort all the way up till birth. And even in Virginia, after birth. Yeah, that's extreme. And the Republicans have been moving left. They've been giving more government power, not less. For more, a shutdown could disrupt air travel and hurt the economy. No, it couldn't. It wouldn't do anything to air travel, nor would it really hurt the economy either. We've had multiple government shutdowns. They've had no real effect on the economy. The economy is the worst in the history anyway. It's not going to get much worse. Quote, fight like hell. Meet 10 House Republicans who say they oppose short-term funding bill. The hardliners have put Republicans who represent districts Biden won in a tough spot. Those are few and far between. Biden only won 500 counties. He's the least popular president in history with the most votes, which is hilarious. He also has the worst approval ratings. House voted to cut Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin's salary to $1, one of several hard right proposals that are unlikely to become law. Yeah, I mean, come on. That's silly right there. You can't have him be paid $1. House Republicans will hold their first public hearing about a Biden impeachment today. They have been grasping for oh man, more evidence keeps coming out on a daily basis, and they're saying grasping for evidence. There's mountains of it. And this is an impeachment inquiry. Okay, it's not an actual impeachment. Remember, the Democrats impeached Trump twice without even alleging a crime. The Republicans are alleging actual crimes, bribery being the top one. $20 million worth of bribes. Presidential debate. Ugh, what a joke that was. 7 candidates talked over one another in the second waste of time. Donald Trump, who skipped the debate, still had a big presence on stage. Ron DeSantis said he was missing in action, while Chris Christie called him Donald Duck. Multiple candidates targeted Vivek Ramaswamy, who will be Trump's VP, who commanded last month's debate. Every time I hear you, I feel a little bit dumber. Nikki Haley said, wow, that's a low blow, Haley, especially from a warmonger like her. The debate was often chaotic. Senator Tim Scott falsely claimed that Haley spent lavishly on curtains and Mike Pence exaggerated his record as vice president. No one cares. Auto workers strike. Instead of attending the debate, Trump visited Michigan one day after Biden. He asked for an endorsement from the UAW president. The union's president said he wouldn't meet Trump, casting him as an out-of-touch billionaire who didn't care about the workers. The union said it would expand its strike against big three automakers on Friday if substantial progress was not made in contract negotiations. So the union's president would meet with Biden, but not with Trump. Gee, I wonder why people think that unions are hard left, because they are. Politics. Robert Menendez pleaded not guilty to federal corruption charges. Dick Durbin, a leading Democrat, joined calls for his resignation. The Senate reverted to its decades-old business attire dress code 1 week after the rules were relaxed. The standards will now be enforceable. Good for them. The judge in Trump's election interference trial rejected his request that she recuse herself, which is absurd because she's flatly stated on multiple occasions that she hates Trump. She's made a whole bunch of disparaging comments about him. She's lied about January 6th. This is probably one of the most corrupt prosecutions I've ever seen. Chinese hackers stole 60,000 emails from State Department accounts earlier this year. Democrat and Republican leaders asked the Supreme Court to overturn lower courts' decisions that restrict them from removing homeless encampments. Let's see. Fire that killed more than 100 people at an Iraqi wedding started when the guests lit flares during the bride and groom's traditional slow dance. The couple escaped. An American soldier who crossed into North Korea in July has been released into U.S. custody. The front line in Ukraine has barely moved since the start of the war, as these maps show. Wow, they're actually admitting it. Let's look. No one. Yeah, that's correct. No one's gaining any grounds, which means that they're not going to do it, which means that Ukraine's counteroffensive is doing nothing, which is what we've been saying for a while now, and we need to just stop. A NASA astronaut returned to Earth after spending 371 days in space, a record space flight for an American. Hope his bones are all right. The Actors Union will resume negotiations with Hollywood studios on Monday with the writer's strike over. Most late-night talk show hosts will return next week. Oh, that's unfortunate. Not that it matters. Meta introduced new AI tools for its apps, including chatbots using the likeness of famous people and image editing tools for Instagram. Gear for making 3D printed guns was found at a daycare in an East Harlem apartment. I mean, as long as it's not a gun, who cares? Mississippi sheriff used grand jury subpoenas to spy on his married girlfriend. Wow. Messed up. But nothing tops the NSA chick who had 1.3 million pics of guys schlongs. Let's see. What is beeping? Let's see. Learning the craft. Juilliard, the renowned art school in New York, is making its graduates acting program tuition free. School officials hope a broader range of students will apply to the program. I knew too many people who didn't apply because they thought I couldn't afford it. Damon Wotzel, the school's president, said. Bruce Springsteen postponed his remaining 2023 tour dates as he recovers from a peptic ulcer disease. Come on, Bruce. It's time to hang it up. Like 70. The British Museum opened a public hotline asking for help locating missing artifacts. That's kind of ironic. Idea the fashion industry's go-to dealer of rare art books is opening a bookstore. Might be interesting. What is that? A pile of colorful sheet pan dinner. Yeah, colorful indeed. Okay, today in history. So the highlight is on September 28th, 1928, Scottish medical researcher Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin, the first effective antibiotic. On this date, 1781, American forces in the Revolutionary War, backed by a French fleet, began their successful siege of Yorktown, Virginia. In 1841, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow completed his poem Excelsior. In 1850, flogging was abolished as a form of punishment in the U.S. Navy, and everything went downhill from there. In 1928, members of the Chicago White Sox were indicted for allegedly throwing the 1919 World Series against the Cincinnati Reds. All were acquitted at trial, but all 8 were banned from the game for life because they definitely did that and made a good chunk of money. In 1924, 3 U.S. Army airplanes landed in Seattle, having completed the first round-the-world trip by air in 175 days. In 1939, during World War II, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union signed a treaty calling for the partitioning of Poland, which the two countries had invaded. In 1958, voters in the African country of Ghana overwhelmingly favored independence from France. In 1962, a federal appeals court found Mississippi Governor Ross Barnett in civil contempt for blocking the admission of James Meredith, a black student, to the University of Mississippi. In 1995, Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin and PLO Chairman Yasser Arafat signed an accord at the White House ending Israel's military occupation of the West Bank cities and laying the foundation for a Palestinian state. Well, that's it. It was supposed to. That didn't ever actually happen. We had the Camp David Accords the second time, and still nothing. Then the Infatadas, and it's just gotten worse. In 2000, capping a 12-year battle, the government approved the use of abortion pill RU-486, which was a dark day in history. In 2018, reversing course, President Donald Trump agreed to the demands of Democrats for a deeper FBI investigation of Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh, and it turned out to be an entirely waste of time. Turns out he's not a gang rapist. 2019, voters in Afghanistan went to the polls to elect president for the fourth time since U.S.-led coalition ousted the Taliban regime in 2001. The vote was marred by violence, Taliban threats, and widespread allegations of mismanagement. In 2020, the worldwide death toll from the coronavirus pandemic topped 1 million. No, it didn't. According to a count by Johns Hopkins, that was a lie. Counted people that died of all kinds of other things. In 2021, testifying before the Senate Armed Services Committee, General Mark Milley, the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, called the 20-year war in Afghanistan a strategic failure and said that he had favored keeping several thousand troops in the country to prevent a collapse of the U.S.-backed government and a rapid takeover by the Taliban. 2022, Hurricane Ian barreled ashore in southwestern Florida as a massive Category 4 storm. About 2.5 million people were ordered to evacuate before the storm hit the coast with a maximum sustained winds of 150 miles an hour. And that was it. One last beep from the printer.